I got a box. But to tell you what's inside the box, I need to start with a story. A few years ago, I got into a public argument with a missionary because he misquoted the Quran, and instead of double checking, he decided to tell me that I was reading the wrong Quran. Sir, for those of you who don't know, there is some controversy about how the Quran was compiled, how it got from a verbal message to a written book. But what is not controversial is that the Quran of the year 656 is functionally identical to the Quran that we have today. There have been some updates in the last 1400 years, like adding in short vowels and punctuation and other grammatical marks, and moving the Bismillah to a non-numbered verse in all but 2 of the chapters. But word for word, it is the same. Anytime a Quran is reproduced, it is heavily scrutinized for accuracy to make sure that nothing in the original text is changed. And these publications go under even more scrutiny when you are translating them into different languages, because Arabic does not translate easily. This is why when I need to use the Quran in the classroom, I include the original Arabic text and specify which translation I'm using, as well as specify any differences or discrepancies between translations. And if there are discrepancies, then I have to break down words letter by letter. Saudi Arabia recently got in trouble because one of their English translations of the Quran had modern place names instead of the historical counterparts. All of this is to say the Quran is not like the Bible. No one has the authority to change it. But somehow, I was reading the wrong one. This is what was in the box. The Study Quran, a new translation and commentary, edited by Syed Hussein Nasser et al. According to that one missionary, this is the right Quran. Ramadan is coming up in about a week, so Muslims around the world are going to be engaging in more spiritual activities such as fasting and studying the Quran. So I'm gonna look at this one and see what the big deal is.
Called dowry. When in Islam, the guy is supposed to give the girl money.
Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Warren Hastings, Judicial Plan of 1772. That sounded better in my head. Warren Hastings' Judicial Plan of 1772, later adopted by the British Crown as the Bengal Model in 1857, addresses this point directly. You see, when the British ruled over India, they weren't very good at it, and it took them a while to figure out that different people follow different religions, and different religions have different laws. So in 1772, Warren Hastings proposed that Muslim court cases should be presided over by Muslim qadis, and Hindu court cases should be presided over by Hindu pundits. Yes, that's where we get the word pundit from. And for issues between Muslims and Hindus, they used a different legal system depending on what the situation was. So for inheritance, for example, they used Muslim law, but for violence, they used Hindu law. So in Talidar's situation of South Asian Muslim weddings, the man's side would have to pay every time, even if one person involved was Hindu. Oh no, wait. Oh man, I can't afford this. First Hajj and now this. Being a Muslim is so expensive. This is not a stupid question, and honestly, I kind of took it for granted by not addressing it in the previous video, so here we go. The easy answer is anyone who knows the Quran will definitely notice if something is wonky in a new publication. But we're not here for the easy answer. The Quran, despite being written down, is primarily an oral tradition. The word al-Quran means the recitation, and there are hadiths that are contested that say that the Quran was never supposed to be written down at all. The reason why it was compiled and standardized in 656 was to help with the recitation, specifically uniting the pronunciation against different dialects of Arabic. But the preferred method of transmitting the Quran has always been to speak it. So all throughout history, the Quran was passed from generation to generation orally, and written Qurans, or Mus'haf Qurans, were used mostly for ornamentation. Those who memorize the Quran in its entirety and have a functioning knowledge of its interpretation are known as Hafiz. And it's a really high honor to become a Hafiz, so there are schools and certification programs around the world teaching people to memorize the Quran. Pakistan brags that they have made 1 million Hafizes. Saudi Arabia says they make 5,000 a year. Iran and Indonesia and other Muslim countries have their own national certification programs to make sure people are memorizing the Quran. So with hundreds of thousands of people around the world learning these same verses word for word, syllable for syllable, it's going to become very apparent when there is a change. And on top of that, we also have the historical record. This, for example, is a page from the Birmingham Quran, which has been carbon dated to be contemporaneous with the Uthmanic Codex, that standardized version from 656. And when that version was compiled and standardized, all other versions, with the exception of 2 rumored versions, were summarily destroyed. So we know that any text from around the same time matches the standardized version, and anything that comes after matches that standardized version as well. And Muslims take the Quran very seriously. It is believed to be the unaltered word of God, so any alterations come with the most dire of consequences. Even in that mistranslation I mentioned in the last video, Saudi Arabia had to apologize. When was the last time the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia apologized for anything? And this is another difference between the Quran and the Bible. Historically speaking, only the wealthy and literate and most pious people had access to biblical texts. But because the Quran is oral, everyone had it. So it would be very difficult for people in positions of authority to sneak something else in there. The easy answer is yes, the Quran is still in the specific dialect from the 7th century that it is believed to have been revealed in. But we're not here for the easy answer. You see, Arabic was not standardized as a single language in the 7th century. I would argue that it's still not standardized as a single language. So in order to make a 7th century Quran that all Arabs could read, not only do you need to standardize spelling and grammar, but you also need to standardize the alphabet. And that's exactly what Caliph Uthman did with his standardized version. He codified Quranic Arabic as a language. For those of you who don't know, codifying or codifying a language is just taking a set of literature and saying, this is the language now. English was codified on a collection of stories, including Beowulf, and Arabic was codified on the Quran. But, like I said in my dictionaries video, languages continue to change and evolve over time, so there is a standard Quranic Arabic, but dialectical Arabic continued to evolve. Fast forward about 2 decades, and the 5th Caliph of the Umayyad Empire, Abd al-Malik, wanted to make Quranic Arabic the standard language for the Umayyad Empire. But the Quran itself does not have enough words to run an empire, so he commissioned scholars to create what we know today as Classical Arabic, which follows grammatical and lexical patterns of the Quran, but expands on the language. So by the 8th century, we have Quranic Arabic, which is standard and not changing. We have Classical Arabic, which is standard and not changing. And dialectal Arabic continues to change over time. Fast forward a few more centuries, and we now have modern Standard Arabic. This is an extension of Classical Arabic that simplifies the syntax so that it can be printed on the newfangled printing presses, but also has rules to accommodate loan words, especially those that involve sounds that aren't already in Arabic. So if you go to an Arabic-speaking country today, you are likely to hear 3 or more varieties of Arabic. You'll hear Quranic or Classical Arabic, which is used for the Quran, obviously, but also most, if not all, Arabic prayers. You'll hear modern Standard Arabic in government documents on international news sources like Al Jazeera, and in secondary and post-secondary education. And you will hear variances of dialectical Arabic just spoken on the street. So if you're reading a Quran today, it is either in Classical Arabic or Classical Arabic with the addition of grammatical marks like short vowels and diacritics to help with pronunciation. For example, this little 9 shape and this circle here are added to aid with pronunciation, but do not change the meaning of the word. Just like we need to refill gas in our cars or recharge the batteries in our toys, we also need to recharge ourselves. So we will eat food to fill up our bodies, we will read books and go to school to fill up our brains, we can play video games or watch TV to fill up our time, and we can fill up our hearts by spending time with family and friends. But with all that filling up, we sometimes forget to fill up our soul. Ramadan is a month in the lunar calendar that's very important to Muslims. You see, Muslims believe that their holy book, the Quran, was revealed by God starting in the month of Ramadan. And they also believe that important parts of the Bible and the Torah were also revealed during Ramadan. So if this is the month that heaven is open and letting stuff down to earth, it might be a good time to fill up our souls. So what do we do to fill up our soul? Well, the obvious answer is to pray, but we can also study religious texts, or we can help other people, or we can start to break bad habits like picking your nose at the wrong time. I'm sure you can think of more examples. And most of the time, Muslims will slow down filling up on other stuff so that they can focus on filling up their soul. Most Muslims slow down on filling up with food. This is called fasting, when you don't eat for certain parts of the day. This is practiced by Muslims and other religions, but it's also practiced by a bunch of people who just want to be healthier. In addition to food, some Muslims will also slow down with video games or iced coffee or being mean to people on the internet, all so that they can focus on filling up their soul. So if you have Muslim friends or if you meet Muslims over the next month, you can say Ramadan Mubarak, which means have a blessed Ramadan. Or you can say Ramadan Kareem, which means have a good Ramadan. And if you want, you can also ask what their goals are for Ramadan and how they're trying to fill up their own souls. For example, I'm going to spend my Ramadan studying and trying to kick some bad habits. So I hope this helps, and I hope you can get through your entire calendar and learn something new. And if you have any other questions, feel free to let me know. This is not a question I expected to get, so I'll try to answer it as best I can. The easy answer is absolutely, but I'm never here for the easy answer. I understand divinity as the connection between us all. Not only the people, but the animals and the plants and the environment and space and everything. I'll put a citation in the comments as usual, but Abu Yaqub al-Sijistani proposed this idea that just like our physical realm tends towards entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, the spiritual realm tends toward unification. And that ultimate unification of everything that existed before the universe did and theoretically after the universe stops existing is what I call divinity. Muslims will cite the chapter of purity from the Quran saying Allahu Ahad, God is one. But that word, Ahad, that is translated as one, is not a numerical one. It refers to a convergence, like the edge of a knife. So in order for talking about Lego on TikTok to be fulfilling to me, I would need to connect it to other things, like the human experience, or the human experience written down. That's literature. Or the human experience times a bajillion. That's history. And I think I've been doing a pretty good job so far, although there's usually one person in the comments that's pleasantly surprised when I change topics. There are so many wonderful creators here on TikTok and across the internet that talk about their fandoms in isolation. There are Lego people and Star Wars people and Star Trek people and Harry Potter people, and there's usually a hard break between subjects. And I learn a lot from these creators too. It's important to drill down into your topics if you want to learn more about them. But my priority is always being connection between topics. And because I believe that everything is connected, finding and sharing those connections brings me a lot of spiritual joy. Last Ramadan, I gave a lecture to my prayer group about Star Wars and how to learn more about Islamic theology from Star Wars. And yes, it's completely different from the TikTok that I made talking about Star Wars as a metaphor for Muslim history. And when I say play well at the end of my videos, yes, that's partially because that's where the word Lego comes from, but it's not just about putting the pieces together. It's about finding that inherent joy in building connections. So in Lego, as in everything, play well, my friends.
Alpha male podcasts are out of pocket.
This is like a life hack for all my alpha Muslim brothers, dog. So when you see a female break her fast early, don't worry about it. That's crazy, dog. I'm serious, bro. Like, don't even ask her question. Can I call her out in front of her friends? Like, I know that's what you're supposed to do, but like, nah, dog. Yo, why even is that? That's the thing. Nobody knows why. It's like one of Allah's mysteries, dude. Subhanallah. Subhanallah, bro. Hey there, this song is trending on TikTok because, well, actually, I don't know what this is. But the song has some cool historical and religious context. The hey there that the song is referring to is Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin and son-in-law and, according to the Shia, the successor of the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam. Hey there means lion, and it's a nickname that Ali's mom gave him when he was a little kid. But according to the legend, he really earned that nickname during the Battle of Khaybar. Khaybar was an oasis in modern-day Saudi Arabia that hosted a thriving Jewish community, including the Banu Nadir tribe, who already had beef with the newly founded Muslim. Because of its natural spring and volcanic soil, Khaybar was great for growing fruits, especially dates. Their dates were known around the world as being the best dates, luxury dates, if you will, but they didn't want to pay luxury taxes. As a result, Muhammad and his army laid siege to the various castles across Khaybar in order to get them to pay their taxes, including this fortress of Al-Qamus, where our story takes place. So they're laying siege to Al-Qamus. It takes about 3 weeks because Al-Qamus is heavily fortified. Not only is it on top of a hill, but there is a pit of spikes beyond the gate that you can only pass through single file, and they have Marhab. Marhab was a fierce warrior known throughout the land, completely undefeated, so much so that he would even recite a poem before going to battle, and that poem would scare people away. So Ali volunteers to fight Marhab one-on-one so that they could take over the castle. Marhab comes out, recites his poem, I am Marhab, I am undefeated, I can even fight lions, and Ali says, good, because I am a lion. It's important to note that according to the Shias, Ali is the quintessential hero, think Luke Skywalker in episode 7. And the song also says Hay la Fata in reference to the common Shia phrase La Fata illa Ali, there is no hero except Ali. So some of his stories are a little bit exaggerated. In this story, not only does Ali defeat Marhab, but he cuts him in half, hot dog style. He then proceeds to tear the gates off of the fortress and use that as a bridge over the pit of spikes, a gate that had to be replaced by 40 people, all recovering from an eye infection, and that's where the fun part of the story ends, because now we come to modern politics. You see, because Khaybar was primarily fought between Muslim people and Jewish people, it is often referenced today in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Here's a pro-Israel sign saying Khaybar was the last time Muslims would win over Jews. And here's a pro-Palestine sign saying get ready for Khaybar Part 2. This protest was in Toronto, so they actually covered up the sword, but you can see the handle. But aside from all that, the song still kind of slaps, so enjoy it.
Assalamu alaikum to all the Muslims. You know what I'm saying? We doing Ramadan tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? I'm practicing.
Hold on, what were you doing on this app before Ramadan? Pass, I'm fasting.
A lot
of people were asking if Teta started that prayer with Bismillah. No, what she was actually saying in Arabic was Bismillah. Do you want to tell everybody what that means in English, Teta?
In English, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
So I think it's important to remember, because we're Arab Christians, we therefore pray in Arabic. I got a lot of people were confused in the comments, so I thought Teta and I would clarify that for you guys. Hope that helps.
Muslims follow a lunar calendar, which means their month is defined by the phases of the moon. Currently, we are in the month of Ramadan, and after that's over, we have Eid al-Fitr, the festival of the breaking, parentheses, of the fast, on parentheses, on the first of the next month, Shawwal. So even though all Muslim calendars are based on the moon, there are still multiple different interpretations of the moon. Some Muslims, like the Dawudi Bohra, use a completely calculated or tabular calendar. So they are taking into consideration the orbit of the moon, the orbit of the earth, and accounting for leap years and stuff like that. I'm a Nizari, so for us, when there is no moon in the sky, that is a new month. New moon, new month. So the new moon, where I'm at, will show up on the afternoon of April 30th. So the next morning, May 1st, we're going to celebrate Eid. For more traditional Muslims, it depends on how you see the moon in the sky. Yes, it is someone's job around the world to stare at the sky until the moon shows up. So they're looking out for the first sliver of a crescent moon, known in the West as the young moon. And as soon as they see that, after sunset, assuming it's not cloudy, the next morning would be the first of the month, and therefore Eid. The young moon is going to show up on the evening of April 1st this year, so their celebrations for Eid are going to be on the morning of the 2nd. And many Muslims around the world don't do local observances, and they just follow whatever Makkah's schedule is. So if Makkah is celebrating on the 2nd, then people in the Far East and Australia and New Zealand may be celebrating on the 3rd because of time zones. Okay, so Ramadan answer. This is Tromsø in Norway. More specifically, it's the mosque in Tromsø. Tromsø has about 1,000 Muslims, mostly Somalian refugees. And when the refugees started arriving there in the 1980s, Ramadan coincided with the midnight sun. Not this one. This midnight sun. In the summertime when the sun doesn't actually go below the horizon in the Arctic Circle. So instead, the Muslims of Trumsa followed Makkah's schedule, adjusting for time zones. So if Makkans started their fast at 5 a.m. Makkah time, Norwegians would start their fast at 5 a.m. Norway time. But it doesn't just apply to Ramadan and fasting. Muslims' daily prayers also depend on the position of the sun. So their prayer schedule is not based on the sun in Norway, but probably a place closer to the equator, maybe even Makkah. Likewise, in space, you also can't follow the position of the sun. So Muslims praying in space should face Makkah if they can find it, or Earth if they can't, and follow the schedule of wherever they took off from. That is a very exciting question with a very boring answer. So fasting and prayers for Muslims depend on sunrise and sunset, and sunrise and sunset depend on the rotation of the planet and the seasons. Earth has a 24-hour day. Mars has a 24-hour and 37-minute day. Meanwhile, Earth is tilted at about 23 degrees, giving us seasons, and Mars is tilted at about 25 degrees. So the time spent fasting on Mars will be pretty much the same as on Earth, give or take up to an hour depending on the season. Now, Ramadan is a lunar month. Its length is decided by the cycles of the moon. New moon, new month. But Mars has 2 moons. Now, the orbital period of Earth's moon is about 27 days, giving us the month. But the orbital period of Phobos, one of Mars's moons, is 8 hours. And the orbital period of Deimos, the other moon, is about 30 hours. So if we wait for both Martian moons to become a new moon, a lunar month on Mars would be about 10 days. So more likely than not, Martian Muslims will wait till it's Ramadan on Earth and then start Ramadan the following evening. So those rules mostly won't change for Muslims on Mars, but for the rules that will change, Muslim scholars will probably come together and figure out something else, just like they did in 2003 for the International Space Station. One of the rules that they came up with regards the Qibla, or the direction of prayer. Muslims should face the Kaaba if they can find it, or Earth if they can't. Now, when we're moving into space, this is something that would be a lot easier on the moon than it would be on Mars. The moon is tidally locked with Earth, which means the same side of the moon is always facing Earth no matter where it is in its rotation, which means that if you build a masjid on the moon that is facing Earth, it will continue to face Earth as the moon orbits. So if you're praying on Mars, you can probably figure out where the Kaaba is and face there, but by the time you're done your prayers, Earth has moved. Which brings us to point number 4. If you can't find the Kaaba and you can't face Earth, just face wherever. Because while the Quran says you should turn your face towards the Kaaba to pray, it also says that no matter which direction you face, God is there. Time is weird. Here on Earth, we have days, months, and years. The day is defined by the Earth rotating on its own axis just once. In solar calendars, the year is defined by the Earth's rotation around the sun, and the month is 1/12 of that. In the lunar years, a month is defined as the moon's rotation around the Earth. Kinda. And a year is 12 of those lunar months. So as a result, lunar years and solar years do not line up at all. So New Year's, for example, for Muslims and those following the Hijri calendar will be on July 29th this year. So as a result of this mismatch, Ramadan happens about 10 days earlier every solar year. This year, Ramadan is happening entirely after the spring equinox, which means that the northern hemisphere is having longer periods of daylight than the southern hemisphere. This means that people in the southern hemisphere have to fast for less time because there's less time between sunrise and sunset in the southern hemisphere. But in about 4 years' time, Ramadan will occur entirely before the spring equinox, which means people in the northern hemisphere will have shorter days and people in the southern hemisphere will have longer days. So if we're talking about who has it easier, the southern hemisphere does this year, but in about 4 years, the northern hemisphere will. Now, if you live in a tropical region or follow Makkah's schedule, this notice will be borderline indistinguishable, but the farther you go north or south, the more noticeable it will become. Even more so once you get past the Arctic Circle, where instead of having to deal with 24-hour sunlight, you'll have to deal with 24-hour darkness. This weekend is Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power or the night of destiny, depending on your translation. This is the night that Muslims believe that the Quran first started being revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. As the story goes, Muhammad was sitting in his cave, meditating as he did, when the cave filled with oppressive, suffocating, blinding light. This light commanded him to read in the name of his Lord who created him from a clot. And Muhammad said no. But then he ran away. But then he cried. But then When he got over it, he talked to a Christian missionary who said, hey, maybe there's something to this whole God's messenger thing. You should check it out. And then Islam started. So while Muslims believe that heaven's gates are open throughout all of Ramadan, Laylatul Qadr is when the blessings really come down hard. Praying on Laylatul Qadr is the equivalent of praying for 1,000 nights. So many Muslims today will be making a special effort to pray tonight after the sun goes down, or they will say special prayers, or some of them will stay up the entire night in congregation praying. Meet your Muslim friends tomorrow and they're a little bit sleepy. Give them a hearty congratulations. I was going to say give them a cookie, but they're probably still fasting. Even though there isn't a singular written rule about it, most Muslim traditions discourage depictions of the Prophet Muhammad, or really any prophet. And the reason behind that is idol worship. You see, before Islam, the Kaaba and the Quraysh, the tribe that Prophet Muhammad belonged to, played host to dozens of idols that people would come from all around the world to worship. So a lot of the Quran's messaging and Muhammad's actions were meant to dissuade, to put it politely, idol worship. It's the same deal as Abraham and the golden calf. And before he was a prophet, Muhammad was already a little bit critical of Christianity, specifically the worship of Jesus iconography. Remember, in Islam, Jesus is believed to be a messenger of God, but only God is worthy of worship. So the general consensus today is there shouldn't be any paintings or statues of the prophets. But of course, there is a spectrum of practice. On one end, some Muslims believe that you shouldn't artistically depict any of God's creations. So no people, including prophets, no angels, no animals, no plants, no landscapes, nothing. Instead, their devotional artwork is filled with calligraphy, the words of the divine, and geometry. On the other end of the spectrum, we have some Muslim groups like the Ottomans who depict the Prophet Muhammad within historical context. For example, this is an illustration of Muhammad from Tabriz in 1307 depicting political negotiations via moon rock. And depictions like this are allowed because this is an illustration from a book meant to help tell a story, not an object of worship. Now, obviously, because I'm showing this picture, I'm okay with these historical depictions, but not everybody is. And this has led to the destruction of a lot of historical artwork, literally defacing the Prophet Muhammad. I feel like the insane timescales are kind of the point. Humans have been using the sun and the moon and the stars to calculate time since forever. Our current calendar is a solar calendar. And even that doesn't line up perfectly, which is why we have leap years every 4 years, except every 100 years, except every 400 years. So if the sun changes, or the moon changes, or the Earth's orbit or rotation changes, everyone is going to be scrambling to figure out the time. But we're talking about Ramadan here. When it comes to calculating the Hijri calendar, named after the Muslim exodus from Mecca, Muslims fall onto a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is those that use Hilal. Hilal is when you go outside and physically look at the moon, assuming the conditions are clear. There are Hilal committees around the world that literally go and look for the moon. And in some places, you can submit your own moon sighting to be verified. If the Earth, Sun, or Moon, or their relative position to each other changes, these people might be out of a job, which brings us to the other end of the spectrum, those who follow a tabulated calendar. Because the movements of astronomical bodies are mostly consistent and mostly predictable, we can use mathematical models to predict calendars centuries into the future. And while modern technology makes those calendars a little bit more accurate, this practice has been going on also since forever. A lot of people think that the ancient Mayans predicted the end of the world on December 21st, 2012, but that was just the end of their calendar. They never got around to making a new one because the one that they had was accurate for centuries into the future, and carving stone is hard. All of this is to say, unless some outside force radically changes the movement of the Earth, the Sun, or the Moon, these Islamic calendars will largely remain accurate. And if some force that we're not predicting does change the movement of the Earth, the Sun, or the Moon, I don't think maintaining calendars will be our priority. So in this last video, I said that Muslims come in two main flavors, Sunni and Shia, and some side flavors. One of those side flavors is Sufism. The Sufis are the monks, the mystics, the monastics of the Muslim world, and while Sunnis and Shias have become defined by their 7th century politics, Sufis seek to reject all of those politics. You see, Muslims believe in two overlapping realms, the spiritual or deen and the physical or dunya, and prayers and ethics and laws help people to bridge those two realms in their daily lives. Sufis, on the other hand, instead of trying to bridge the two, seek to reject the physical or dunya as much as they can, including material comforts and property. Sufis instead focus on spiritual aspects of their life, specifically dhikrullah, or the constant remembrance of the divine. Now, Sufism, the word, does not describe a single belief system or practice. If anything, it is more varied than any other school of Islam. But what I think puts Sufis on the map, besides being on the map, is their devotional literature, because constantly contemplating the divine leads to some amazing poetry and music. Those of you in the West may already be familiar with Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi, aka the poet Rumi, whose poems about divine love have been mistranslated into poems about interpersonal love. I've already made a video about that. I've also already made a video about Rabia al-Basri or Rabia al-Azawiya. I'm pretty sure I've talked about Fariduddin Attar as well. He wrote The Conference of the Birds and the biography of Rabia al-Basri. If you're familiar with Bollywood, A.R. Rahman is a classically trained Sufi composer who has made bangers, both religious and not. And you may also be familiar with Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, who is also world-renowned for his Sufi music. And a recent favorite is the Firdaus Ensemble that creates Celtic Sufi music. As controversial as music is in the Muslim world today, that's not what gets Sufis in hot water. You see, the Prophet Muhammad wasn't just a religious leader, he was also a political leader. So many Muslims necessarily conflate religion and politics when it comes to the implementation of Islam. So Sufis being anti-politics are often seen as being anti-Islam. Add on top of that the Sufi ideas of universal love and acceptance, which are also seen as anti-Islamic by fundamentalists. So while Sufis are literally about peace, love, and rock and roll, not everyone can jive with that. Okay, I know Alauddin Khalji genocided like a bunch of Nizari Khojas back in the day, but look at his cute little dance! Today, or tomorrow for some people, is Eid al-Fitr, the festival of the breaking of the fast. After 30 days of fasting and giving to charity and contemplating and overall living a modest and mindful life, Muslims will now celebrate around the world with feasts and shopping and giving gifts to people. Celebrations for Eid differ from culture to culture. For example, my family growing up would wake up early, go to Eid prayers, and then grab McDonald's breakfast on the way to school. And today I woke up early, said my prayers, and grabbed Tim's on my way to work. As I explained in my first Ramadan video, there is more to fasting than just abstaining from food. You also need to reduce your unhealthy habits. You also need to contemplate the divine and your religion. And for some Muslims, also called Batini Muslims, those aspects of the fast are all year round. So Eid al-Fitr isn't a celebration of anything except being able to eat lunch again. But I don't want to yuck anyone's yum. Lots of Muslims around the world are dressing in their fanciest clothes and doing their fanciest TikTok trends and celebrating with their friends and families and loved ones. Because I think in light of everything, sometimes we just need an excuse to party. And that's what Eid is, historically. You see, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, the festival of the sacrifice, are not ordained celebrations. The Quran and the Prophet didn't say, hey, y'all should party today. Instead, the partying today is something that people started organically, and the Prophet saw it and said, yeah, cool. Because we're humans, we're social animals, and sometimes we just need an excuse to party. So to everyone who's partying today or tomorrow, Eid Mubarak.